Hello, Rufus King Nation. This is Anthony Lauer, art and design teacher at Rufus King High School, and you're listening to Episode 5 of the King's Cast, a podcast introducing our listeners to the men and women working each day to teach the next generation of Rufus King generals. Today, we're talking about science with Nola Thompson, one of Rufus King High School's amazing science teachers. In our conversation, we will also discuss how the International Baccalaureate program aims to develop King students into inquiring, knowledgeable, and caring individuals who strive to create a better and more peaceful world. Thanks for taking a few minutes to listen today. Good morning, Ms. Thompson. Welcome to the King Cast. Ms. Thompson is one of our science teachers here at Rufus King High School. What are some of the classes that you teach?
Yeah, so right now I'm teaching mainly freshman biology, so like three classes of that, and then I also teach 2 anatomy classes, so we might change that in the next year.
How's anatomy going?
It's always interesting. So anatomy is one of our like non-IB classes.
Yeah.
So
more of those upperclassmen electives that students can take, but I'm sure a lot of the IB kids still take it to understand the body.
It's interesting because there's some overlap. Like IB does a lot with like menstrual cycles and like the kidney, because that's on the IB test for bio students. So some of it I maybe focus on less because I know they're spending more time there. They're going to get
it somewhere else. Yeah. I remember my last school, one of the only anatomy teacher, interesting guy, but he would do the whole digestive system and the circular system. He'd tape it to the floor of his classroom and walk the kids through.
Yeah, maybe next year. I'll have my own room.
I mean, traveling on a cart, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's some of the classes. Oh, man, how many different rooms are you in?
4 for 5 different classes.
I have once in my time here at King been on every floor, on a different floor of the first 3 hours of the day. So I'd start on the first floor, go up to the 3rd floor, then go down to the 2nd floor. Same thing with Lisa Bungie, who I used to teach the design class with. It was nuts, but we do the best we can with this almost 90-year-old building. Starting off with question number 1, what brought you to Rufus King High School?
Yeah, so arguably the fact that my parents are both King students, and so then I was a King student.
God, there's a lot of that legacy out there, for better or worse. I don't like the term, but I like the idea that Rufus King just kind of has that impact on Milwaukee.
Yeah, so my dad's family was going here before it was even an IB school.
Yeah, so pre-70s.
Yeah, so his siblings were here in the 70s, and he was in the class that started the college prep program. Wow. So he's 1980. He had 20 kids in his graduating class.
Wow.
He got to have 2 lockers. And so my mom was in technically that middle school class
that came
in, and so she graduated in 85.
Was this building still middle high school at that point?
Yeah. So
I don't know what time it got converted, but I know when it was opened in the 1930s, it was meant to be a junior, senior high, as they called it back then.
Yeah, so it was 6 through 8 when my parents were here. So they technically overlap, but they met when my mom was an intern where my dad worked.
Oh, that's a plus.
Yeah, so they didn't meet in high school.
I mean, back then high school sweethearts were more common, but yeah.
Yeah, well,
middle school sweethearts, bit of a stretch.
Well, and I apparently keep with that because I started dating someone I went to high school with. Yeah, so when because I worked for 2 years in my college's biology department after I graduated, and so I had already been planning on pursuing my teaching license before the pandemic hit.
Okay.
And then with the pandemic hitting, it kind of pushed me back home faster than I expected it to.
Yeah, there's so much, I don't want to say fallout, it seems so negative, but we already have negative thoughts of the pandemic, but there's so many different ways that the pandemic has altered generations' path.
Yeah.
Multiple generations have had to take different paths in life they weren't expecting.
Yeah, so then I was back here working on like my first semester of that over the summer, and then I saw, and since I already had a biology degree, I could pursue
you could get in on an emergency
Yeah.
license while you're earning your teaching license.
So then I saw that King had an opening for biology, which is really the only subject other than maybe art that I would want to teach. So I was like, I can't not apply. So that's how I ended up back here.
Well, that's awesome. Well, welcome back into the halls. This is year 3, 2.
This is the end of my second year.
Of the end of your second year, okay.
Yeah.
Which really is going to be the end of your first year, as we joke with Mr. Stovall, our choir teacher, because it's technically the end of his third year, but he had 2 years of pandemic life.
Yeah.
This is really the first time people got a year back into the building for our new teachers. And
Yeah.
Well, welcome. What was one what was one of the aspects of the IB that you connect with when teaching or when you were a student?
Yeah, so organization and like being able, right, 'cause that's one of the tenets. And that was always an interesting one because in a lot of ways I feel like I was way better at it as a student than as a teacher.
Okay.
Because I was full IB when I was a student, so I did, the EE. We didn't have personal projects when I was here.
No, yeah, that's within the last 9 years for our sophomores.
Yeah, and I graduated 8 years ago, so, MYP was just getting...
Its feet on it, yeah.
Yeah, when I was here.
Feet under it.
But I did do the whole EE. I did German, IB art, IB biology, obviously. The the calculus class. So
that's always been a small one, yeah. There's just not a lot of kids in the IB calculus class.
That was small. So that was always kind of a lot of planning on staying on top of things just because, it's a lot. It is a lot of work. I can't lie.
No, of course not. But I do agree that there's that structure there that helps, and it does seem like it is an educational pedagogy that's created through the idea of what would also help students.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know when I first got here trying to tackle the idea of how do I take my art that I've taught now for almost a decade and all of a sudden try to fit it into this new matrix of what the IB wants. But I think the IB has done a great job of building a structure that is considering the students' need to understand how to organize their time, their energies, their efforts, but then shows that in each of the content areas, which then gives that connecting red thread through biology, through health, through social studies or individuals and identities, through language, through literature. And with that structure on each class, it helps students then see that connectivity so that they can concentrate specifically on the content in that classroom.
Yeah, and I think it also really helped in college, having that background, because in college, you aren't on anyone else's timetable. You really are, you have...
Free to make your choices and free to take your consequences.
Yeah, my college was a small kind of liberal arts college. It's called Knox, and they're on a trimester system where you take 3 classes a semester, and that's it. So,
but then 3 semesters a year, so you're year-round on 3 classes.
Yeah, which was nice in some ways in that, if you didn't... So those classes are only 10 weeks. So it's nice in that if you didn't like a class, you're done with it, but those classes moved fast. So you really had to know what you were doing and, be willing to go out and ask for the help if you needed it. And stay kind of constantly working, which I think IB really did help prep me for. And then teaching, there's always new things.
Yeah, one of the later questions is talking about, especially science. I mean, a lot of the MYP are changing over some of their core standards. And they're simplifying the names of what those core standards are, but they're changing, right? We're part of this ever-evolving system created by a think tank of international minds, and but understanding that as a teacher and trying to weave it into our own teaching styles becomes complicated, but keeps us on our toes, I think.
Yeah.
Forces some of that independence as well as some of that collaboration in a very weird dynamic.
Yeah.
In your classes, do you have a favorite unit, topic, or project that you teach?
So I really at heart am like animal structural evolutionary biology.
Darwinism. I have a copy of the evolution, Species of Man. Origin of Species, thank you.
Yeah.
It's from the 1970s. It's definitely not an original. I'm not that great, although I do have some other first and fifth editions of other big books. But Origin of Species, definitely something I had to put on my artist shelf to, at minimum, have some of the etchings and drawings of the species they found.
Yeah. So, as I alluded to, I was also a big art person, both in high school and college. My minor is in like graphic design.
And again, you walked in today stunningly stylish. I was able to pick up on the theme of your outfit today, and it shows the creative side of you.
Yeah, I actually sewed this dress. So.
That's awesome. I work on sewing and designing my own bow ties, at least with my mom. Yeah. My mom and I make. So shout out, Mom, to helping me with my bow ties.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked in costuming. So all that is to say, what interests me about art and what interests me about biology and why I like both is that I really like looking at form and why do the forms that we see in nature actually exist.
What are their functions?
Yeah, because form always follows function. One of the great tenets of biology and structural biology. So
and engineering for your engineers out there.
Yes, very much. So like if I were looking at the trees out this window and I had a nice reference guide with me, which I don't currently, you could look at the branches alternating where their leaves are and what are the shapes of the leaves, and from that pull out what type of tree it is pretty quickly. Again,
looking at the design of things, finding those patterns. It's a human trait to want to find patterns in things, but it's certainly the scientific mind and the curiosity and maybe a little bit of the creativity of humanity and arts that help us to discover those. I mean, that is what Darwin did, right? He went out, he looked, he observed, he questioned, and he discovered.
Yeah. So that's really where my key is. I'm kind of finishing up with like talking about like hybridization and like both why hybrids don't exist and why they can pursue, but also those kind of interesting cases where technically they can, because...
I was going to say, isn't a donkey a hybrid, technically?
Not donkeys, mules.
Mules, my apologies.
That's actually what I'm going to talk about today.
There we go.
So a mule is specifically a female horse, male donkey. Hinny is the opposite. Hinny are less common because, for example, in terms of like a behavioral reproductive barrier, the male horse and the female donkey are the ones who are choosing their partners, so they're going to be more choosy and not want to mate with each other, as opposed to the female horse and the male donkey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Says something about donkeys there, I suppose.
Hey.
Well, yeah. All right. So what's the project then? Are the students doing something specifically with that knowledge?
So,
I mean, I could definitely take it down a comic book level and go into mutants and the idea of Inhumans and all that other stuff, but...
Yeah. Last year I did a project, this one, because time is very short with this year. Yeah. We're just kind of looking at it, wrapping some things up. I have some matching cards, basically, that they'll be doing. So it's not just animal ones. So we do have mammal ones, like wolfins, which are killer whales and dolphin hybrids, or like what is it, roller bears?
It almost sounds like a Pokemon in and of itself.
Roller bears, which are like grizzly polar bear hybrids, which are actually becoming more common because
they're all starting to find the same food sources.
Due to global warming, their ranges are overlapping.
Global warming? Climate change?
And so, like, those, for example, are hybrids that are fertile and could actually theoretically at some point maybe become a new species if it were to continue to propagate. So, but then there's also a bunch of plant hybrids, like spearmint, that we eat in our chewing gum.
I was going to say, and plants tend to be a little bit more open to being cross
Yeah.
bred, if I remember my biology class a little bit more. That's going back to the 90s.
You can usually get a first generation, but sometimes you see what's called hybrid decay, where so your first
lose some of
generation
those
is
traits.
cool, and then it starts to get weaker and weaker until it becomes sterile, like 2 or 3 generations in.
So I have a personal question I want to take off of this of my own personal curiosity, but also a follow-up on that card game. So I'll ask the personal question first, and then the question about the card game, the assignment that we were talking about. Is that how we have so many different species of dogs? Because that's one thing that's always intrigued me, and I understand that it's happened through breeding, but the fact that there are, I mean, a cat is a cat is a cat, not to bother my cat listeners, if there are any. But that idea that, for the most part, felines look the way they look, whereas dogs have a lot of versatility and variety in their nose and snout structures and their tails and their sizes.
Yeah. So technically all dogs are a subspecies of wolf. So
Yeah.
they're all just one species. So theoretically they can all interbreed. There are some, what we call a mechanical barrier, like a Great Dane and a Chihuahua are 2 size different. So that's what we'd call artificial selection. So a human was like, I like that. I think that's cute. I think that's going to help me hunt better. I'm going to breed
Put those
one
two
dog
together.
that looks like that with another dog that looks like that.
But I still try to think, I mean, a grizzly and a polar bear,
Yeah.
on the surface, have a visual similarity.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are much more differences along the way, but as those two species breed, I would imagine the crossbreed or the hybrid would still be very similar in look.
Yeah.
Whereas again, a Great Dane and a Chihuahua are very different
Yeah.
dogs, but they all still come from what we know as wolves. Maybe not modern day wolves, but some version on the evolutionary branch.
So we've there's that Siberian fox experiment, if you heard
I have
about
not.
that. So that's one where they had a fox farm basically to farm fur, and they were like, what if we just bred together foxes that were willing to come to humans?
Okay. So giving them that introduction to a lack of fear of the species.
Yeah, so we're just going to keep breeding together the foxes that are willing to be around humans. And they found within only a couple generations you start getting like floppy ears or piebald colors. So it seems, and which makes sense because
It does. I just can't imagine it would have been in a couple generations.
Yeah.
That's pretty quick
So-
for an evolutionary mutation.
yeah, evolution can happen pretty quickly. Part of it seems to be that light-colored animals or animals with those floppy ears, that would hurt them in the wild because you can't hear as well as if
'Cause
your
it's
ears
covering
are
up your ear
floppy,
lobes. Yeah,
or
okay.
if you have multiple colors in your coat, you're easier to see. But humans are protecting against that, which is a
So
mutualism.
there's less of a need.
So that's why most domestic species, you'll see more albinism or you'll see more of those color changes. And then with dogs, it's basically kind of inbreeding them to get specific things, which is how you get exaggerates them over a generations and generations.
Well, then we'll take it back to the card game. So how do you have a set of cards, or what is exactly the assignment that the students would be using to learn genetics?
So I have cards that are basically split in a half. So it's like a horse on one side, or half of a horse and half of a donkey, with some descriptions about each of those species. And so the idea is that you're kind of trying to put them together and figure
And connect
out
the parts that connect academically or not connect.
Yeah, and then try and figure out what are kind of the best traits or hybrid vigor in this case that you're trying to get by putting those two things together.
All right, so it can be hypothetical. It doesn't have to be a scientific reality. It can be a hypothetical of what are the stronger traits if we were to start to crossbreed.
Yeah, and then at the end, I'll kind of come in and talk about what specifically the actual combinations are, and talking a bit about how those represent, as said, like mechanical barriers or hybrid vigor or hybrid invariability.
So last question on this game.
Yeah.
Something you created, something you found.
So I found it last year. I kind of rebuilt it to be virtual and like redrew all the images because we had different time.
Again,
and
combining your talents of science and art.
Yeah. So
But so it is an established activity that is out there, but you've made it your own and made it work with not only in person and virtual, but to make it fit your teaching style and the IB's tenets.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Awesome, great conversations and sidetrack. But as the school day is going to start in about 15 minutes, we'll move on to number 4. What advice do you have about attending school in general, or about attending school at Rufus King, since you have that unique perspective of having not only been a student and a teacher here, but being the offspring of 2 Rufus King grads?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would most point out is, like I said, there is that history of King in Milwaukee. I would recommend you use it. Like, it is kind of one of the cool things about being at such an established building and with such an established program is that you don't just have like the current students, but you have all those generations past who do still really care about the school and what's happening. Like, we had some other alumni just recently give money
for that scientific research project.
Yeah, for students to
Bahamas?
go. I think so,
yeah. Like 2 weeks or 3 weeks in the Bahamas looking at stingrays and researching animal life.
Yeah, so, get out there and network, basically. And also join things. Like, I was arguably over-involved when I was a student, but I think that's the fun of going to, especially an in-person high school, is that you get to be involved in sports if that's your thing. It wasn't mine, or I was in manga club.
Yeah, sports ball didn't help me much either.
Yeah, but
I did it a couple times, but
manga club is where I met my current partner. I was in academic decathlon. I had a lot of fun there. I was in NHS. I have a lot of memories of doing different, like, volunteering around the building.
Yeah, and it comes back, and I know now that we're on episode 5 that this just sounds like some long infomercial, and I hope it's not sounding too cheesy, but these are authentic experiences that people have had here at Rufus King. Again, we're hearing today from a former student that took the experiences that Rufus King had to offer, and it helped guide their life. So much so that it created her own life from her parents. It helped her find a partner in life. It helped her find her path to study what she wanted and what interested her. And as hopefully you can hear from today's conversations, help them get to a happy and comfortable spot in life. With Rufus King kind of weaving its way in and out. Not saying that's going to do it for every student.
Yeah. Not everyone's experience, definitely, but, like, I think also in some part you have to be open to the experience.
Well, like, absolutely. And that's with almost anything in life, not just high school.
Yeah, very much. Like, also, at the same time, I can't deny it. Being a teenager is hard. Like, it is emotionally difficult. I went through stuff and I didn't have a global pandemic hanging over my head when I was a student. I was just dealing
we
with,
thought it was hard, but it's 1,000 times harder for the generations behind us.
Yeah, and also, like, computers were very different when I was a student. I think we maybe had, like, 2 or 3 Chromebook carts in the building.
I'm turning 40 next week. Is it next week? The week after that. And I tell my kids all the time, I had a classroom shelf full of dictionaries, thesauruses, and I had to learn what the Dewey Decimal System was, and I had to use the card catalog, and I'm only turning 40. But that's how much technology has changed since I was a student myself to now being a teacher.
Yeah, and even just me, like, basically everyone I knew, including myself, had, like, a brick phone and an iPod when I was a student. Like, I heard someone say, like, in the hallway a while back, be like, I bet Mr. Zizi, another science teacher here, was always on his phone when he was a student. And I kind of looked as a student and I was like, I didn't have a phone that you could always be on when I was in his class, like, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
He definitely was.
Well, there's definitely a what if right there. Like, what if some of our more established teachers had cell phones when they were teenagers? What would that have looked like?
Yeah.
Well, again, you could go down the history avenue of that. What would the Vietnam War have looked like? What would have Desert Storm looked like? What would have any kind of assassination or political movement or anything else looked like if cell phones would have existed for that generation's teenagers? All right, science-specific question.
Okay.
So, In science, IB's second standard, also known as its criterion, asks students to inquire and design. IB defines this as students having the ability to explain a problem or question that could be scientifically investigated, formulate a testable hypothesis, and try to predict possible variables of an experiment. How do you tackle this particular standard in your classroom? And how have your students positively responded to or achieved in this standard in your classroom?
Yeah, so I've done a couple different experiments, particularly with my freshman classes, which is what most people coming in here are going to be doing anyways.
Yeah, it's one of those standards. You come in your freshman year, you've got that science class.
So one of the big ones I did, it was right before spring break. So we were looking at water filtration. So I gathered a bunch of different supplies, so gravel, sand, charcoal, cups, cotton, pantyhose, all kinds of things. And so the idea was you're trying to make like water that is closest to drinkable for a human with these supplies that are here for you. How do you go about that? And so the inquiring is obviously
questioning what each material offers in terms of filtration.
Yeah, and then you can get to your hypothesis from there. I think a combination of charcoal and gravel is going to make it the best. And then
I'm sure that's probably one of the last options for some of the students. Again, thinking about charcoal.
Yeah.
What would charcoal do? But it actually works as a filtration system in almost every one of our filters if we have a water filter at home.
Yeah, very true. And so then it's, let's go ahead and make these and see what the outcome was. So, fun thing to do, like very hectic on my end. Again, I teach specifically MYP Bio in 3 different classrooms, which means I had to set up all of the stuff in 3 different rooms. But a lot of people got to at least an answer, and also a place of maybe I can build on this in a future endeavor.
All right, Ms. Thompson, we have come to the end of our conversation for the day. I've had a lovely conversation. I appreciate you coming in and sharing a little bit of your past and a little bit of your views on Rufus King. As is tradition, we usually close out with either a final thought, a quote, or a book recommendation you might have for our listeners.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of final thoughts, like, I just really like, I had an actual final thought. Try a bunch of stuff. Like, as I've mentioned here, like, I sew, I draw, I paint. I also do some music, not a ton, but like, and like I do art or science, like you don't need to limit yourself just to what you think you're good at or what you've liked in the past. So really, take the time to explore that, especially when you're going somewhere new.
Using that learner profile of open-mindedness.
Yeah.
To see what we all have to offer. But to also plug and chug some of the things we do currently have that may or may not have been around when you are. We still have the board game club, or I think now it's called the Games Society of Rufus King High School. I do believe the students told me we still have the manga club. We have new this year the Arts and Crafts Club that Miss Fig has started.
Yeah, I usually help out with that.
Of course, we have the art classes that are here as well. We have hardcore science kids. And those are just some of the opportunities that students at Rufus King have to explore related opportunities that you used in your closing thoughts. So I thought I'd plug those in for the school.
So lots of fun, lots of things to try out.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, and you have yourself a lovely rest of your day. Hello, Rufus King Nation builders. I wanted to thank you for taking the time today to listen to our 5th King's Cast podcast, introducing our community to the staff working daily in the halls of Rufus King High School to support our student generals. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation about inquiring and designing experiments in science with Nola Thompson, 2nd generation Rufus King graduate and current biology teacher at Rufus King High School. After today's conversation, I'm reminded of the great history art and science have had and the partnerships used between those disciplines to create some of the best discoveries mankind has found. That said, please join us again next month as we sit down with another Rufus King staff member to discuss how they bring the International Baccalaureate to life in their classrooms.